All right, now we come to another big part of the lesson, enlightenment. The Enlightenment represents a new way of thinking. Where that man turned more and more away from religion and towards philosophy. A big part of the Enlightenment involved the scientific method, but a big part of it also involved questioning old religious values. They believed, among other things, that reason could lead us to a path of creating a heaven on earth or creating a utopia down here. That if we would all just think and reason, we'd all come to the same conclusions. By the way, Martin Luther believed this also. He believed that everybody thought things through like he did, they'd come to his conclusions. And I got something to tell you, folks, about the Enlightenment. You get 10 people together thinking about a certain problem, and I can guarantee you they're going to come to 11 different conclusions at least. Mankind to this day has not come to a single conclusion about what's right, what's best, what works best, but they believed they could, and they believed it's a scientific method. All right, I'm going to give you some raw science. I mean, when I was at Lockheed, we sometimes had to measure the accuracy of thermometers. So we'd get a thermometer in water, just struck a boil, and we measure it at 212. Put a similar thermometer into the same pot of boiling water, the temperature is 212. Basically, science is repeatable. You do the same experiment with the same equipment, and you'll achieve the same results. Now, if that is true, why can't those of you sitting in the same classroom where the temperature is the same, the lighting is the same, with the same teacher, taking the same test, why don't we all make the same grade? Because scientific principles do not apply to human behavior. And speaking of predictability, is there anyone in here who thinks you can predict the stock market? I don't see a hand going up. Anybody think you can predict the weather? I mean, when I was,
Yeah, they are doing that. They are predicting the weather.
with 100% accuracy. We try to predict the weather every day. Now, we've just seen an example less than a week ago of a really bad miss. The weather forecast has increasing in accuracy the farther ahead you try to predict. 10 days, and that's not so accurate. 9 days, a little bit more accurate. 8 days, a little more. What about tomorrow's weather? Right 6 times out of 7. All right, when I was a kid, the weatherman was right 6 times out of 7. They told if we could just get satellites into orbit and get a better picture, get computers. Today we have the satellites, we have hundreds of computers per weather station, and the weatherman is still right 6 times out of 7 predicting tomorrow's weather. Hasn't changed that much. But there were some things, folks, I'm getting at, we can predict, but when it comes to human behavior, they believe that scientific principles could be applied to societies. And we could make a society turn out the way we want it to. We can make humans turn out the way we want them to, if we can put the right environment. Now, the scientific method. Again, your book puts that term scientific method in dark, bold print, that it could lead to a better understanding of all of life. Now, I want to say something else about the Enlightenment that's not in a book. With the Enlightenment, you come up with a concept of rights. Nobody had hardly thought of rights before. Before this time, it was responsibilities. No, you have the responsibility to not steal. You have the responsibility to not kill. You have the responsibility to live this way or that. Responsibility. Then came the concept of rights. You have a right to And among other things, it will end up leading to a right to free public education and a right to a free meal, a right to work. Rights become to where there's some things that we call rights that I just have to say, no, they are not rights. I'll leave that. But everybody has a right to, in one word, I'm going to, humans have no rights. I mean, I'll tell you, humans have responsibilities. Responsibilities, yes, plenty. Rights, we have none. If any of you want to contest it, I promise I won't argue. I'll listen. You're welcome to say what you want to. I mean, I've seen so much about rights in my time that it's. But anyway, the concept of rights came about. Now, this leads to a new word. It may look like it's misspelled, and I've been mispronouncing it for years, but I finally noticed the pronunciation. Philosophes. Philosophes. The word is a French word, and it basically means philosophers. But the word is only used in connection with 16 and 1700 Enlightenment philosophers. They're called philosophes. And now, the first of the philosophes we'll talk about, and again, I'm throwing a bunch of names at you. These people are important. And I want to say this before going further. For those of you who are American, Americans have tended to not follow philosophers. The intellectual in America has just not been, he's just not made any headway in America. But Europeans would gang around intellectuals and follow them. And they have done this up until, like you might say, the mid-20th century. There aren't very many famous European intellectuals anymore than I know of. But these men were very important in the study of these two Europeans. First one, Montesquieu, and the one thing I remember about him is he's famous for his doctrine of separation of powers. And this is very important because his ideas were used by our America's founding fathers. Now, I realize, folks, I'm talking to a class where a lot of you are not American, but again, hopefully you realize you're in an American school and you might expect to hear this from an American teacher. But the American Constitution copied Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers, where one branch of government is headed up by one man, that's the executive. Another branch of government is the council, that's the Congress. The council has two houses, the House and Senate. And then there's the courts. 3 branches of government, and each supposedly has the power to stop the other. I say supposedly because the way our Constitution is now set up, our Supreme Courts cannot be stopped. They rule like philosopher kings. But anyway, there's no. The last time a Supreme Court decision was overturned by Congress was in 1912, the income tax decision. Nobody alive remembers it. Nobody alive today was around back then. It's been 102 years. Congress passed an income tax law. Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional, so Congress passed a constitutional amendment that overturned a Supreme Court decision. That was 102 years ago. They can make a decision 5-4, and it's virtually impossible to overturn. But anyway, supposedly each branch of government has the power to stop the other two from its excesses. The greatest of all the philosophes was Voltaire. Voltaire believed that if people would just think, they would not do the bad deeds they do to each other. he was really hard on man's inhumanity to man. He said one person should not enslave another. And by the way, the Enlightenment taught the world that slavery was wrong. He said slavery should be abolished, serfdom should be abolished, and cruel and unusual punishments should be abolished, and said if people would just stop and think, they wouldn't do these things to each other. Spoke out against man's inhumanity to man. He criticized the religion of his day really sharply, and of course part of the reason for that was he was very much aware that the religions of his day would oftentimes persecute dissenters, and laws persecuting Protestants were on the books in many Catholic countries in Voltaire's day, even though by this time Protestant nations had realized they could not convert everybody to Catholicism. So Protestant nations had allowed religious freedom, much more so than Catholic countries that were still trying to compel or coerce people in the area of religion. Again, he championed the viewpoint I was talking about earlier called deism.